Around the world, as cities are under strict lockdown, women and children who live with domestic violence have to be more cautious. Gender-based activists have raised concerns that lockdowns can have a huge impact on domestic violence and gender-based violence. According to reports, an estimated 3.3 million people and 10 million children are exposed to adult domestic violence each year. For more perspective, we are now joined on the line by Keitumetse Fatimata Moutloatse, the chairperson of the Black Women Caucus, to help us unpack this discussion further. Keitumetse, very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to SA Today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your viewers.
Now, women globally could possibly be living with their abusers. I mean, we know for sure that abuse can be mental and physical. Talk to us about this perspective.
I think it's not even a possibility. I think it's a reality for many women across the globe. A recent article came out that stated that domestic violence would be rising by 30% globally due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has resulted in several countries going into a lockdown. And so what this means, it means that women and children are forced to stay in confinement with their abusers. And as is explained, that abuse does not only look like physical or sexual, but this abuse can include financial abuse as well as emotional abuse, particularly in a context like South Africa, where we have such an unequal society and we have a majority that is poor. We will see that a lot of tensions will rise, which will cause an increase in violence in our households.
Now, it's been said, Keitumetse, that triggers in some cases whereby certain issues can actually trigger an abuser to act in a certain way. How would you advise men and women to exercise extra caution and calm in a situation like this?
I mean, I think triggers are inevitable, right? Particularly given the context that we find ourselves in. I think it's important to note that South Africa had under 72 hours to literally reconfigure their realities to fit and adjust to this lockdown, which meant that many people were not able to make the necessary financial preparations or even provide food. And people wondered, something as basic as a decent meal can be a huge trigger within households, right? Issues of substances. We've just realized in the past few days that South Africa is a highly intoxicated country. We depend so much on alcohol to cope with a lot of the issues that we see on a social level. So triggers are inevitable, number one. But I think it's how we respond to triggers, which is really where the work needs to be done. The reality is that many of us are staying in contexts that don't even allow us to go outside and go breathe and take a breather because we're so angry. But I think what we need to do is, number one, is to make sure that people who are potential victims of violence, they should be able to reach out to several organizations. I mean, we've got a range of toll-free numbers that provide on-site psychosocial support services. And this is a time where our SAPS should really be pulling up their socks. We are going to see an increased amount of people being victimized in their households. We also demand that equally our state is able to respond accordingly to the high rates of gender-based violence within a household.
By all means, Keitumetse, self-isolation is very critical for this period to flatten the curve, and abusers can use this power to manipulate their victims. I mean, they can use lockdowns and self-isolation as, coercive and controlling behavior. So how would you advise men and women not to engage in conflicts under lockdown, and how can the victims of domestic abuse be protected?
Of course, I think, as you've said, I mean, the conditions of the lockdown in itself are one that really allow for tensions to build up. As I said, there was no adequate preparation into the lockdown. Many of us were caught off guard, and as a result, many households are not properly prepared for this, right? And this means something as basic as food something as basic as substances, which many people are reliant on. In terms of children, there's extra mouths to feed because children are no longer going to school. The burden on women, particularly, to make sure that there's enough food for the children throughout the day, as well as probably their abuser, is something that has been seen as inevitable in many of our households. However, in terms of prevention, I do think more than anything else is to be able to understand the context that you're living in. The government has made efforts in terms of making provision for vulnerable people. Our Minister of Social Development has recently come out and said that there has been an increase in shelters being made available for victims. I always suggest that before you even allow for the act to happen, if there are any signs of violence happening, this is a time where people need to reach out for help. Right? We've got several organizations that are currently in the process of providing these services that are both online and physical, and we really want to encourage people to make use of these services. We do also understand that we do find ourselves in very precarious times, very challenging times. It's not always easy to propose for people to leave their households during an uncertain time. But we are also trusting in our governments and civil society's ability to be able to handle cases of violence against women and children.
All right, Keitumetse, thank you so much for your time and for your reflections. Much appreciated. That was Keitumetse Fatimata Moutloatse, the chairperson of the Black Women Caucus, on the line.